Welcome to Data Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We have the session here every Friday, apparently, to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about data vaults, data mining, data-driven applications, cloud computing, MPP stuff, and so on. And all questions are allowed in this space. And you can use the chat here if you want to raise a live question. You can use the Q&A functionality in this client to raise a live question, or you just raise your hand and I will give you voice. No misuse. And I'll also show you a link to a form after today's session where you can submit your questions, and I'll pick them up essentially. I just cherry pick them essentially. And it's time boxed, so your question should be relatively good to answer within 10 minutes or something. And if there would be no questions at all, I will talk about cluster. I haven't done much of it, to be honest, for 2 years. It's off, right? So it's not consuming any storage, any power. But I mean, the cluster, some other devices work. But yeah. Glad I'm getting enough questions here, or we're getting enough questions. All right, let's jump into the question of today. So this is about CDC data coming from SAP. So SAP in this, I'm ignoring SAP, to be honest, because as long as it's CDC data, we should be fine. There's some caveats though. That's why it's an interesting variation of a question we already discussed, essentially. You will find those questions online on YouTube, for example. So this one here says, okay, we have CDC data coming from SAP data and want to model this into a raw data vault. Part of this CDC data is information about whether the record was created, updated, or deleted inside SAP. So we got this all data from SAP, who created the record, who modified it, when was it modified, and so on. How would you model this data, this CDC data in a satellite? What if the source table contains GDPR-relevant personal data, record creation, update, deletion, other normal attributes, as well as always empty columns? How would you split this data into several satellites? Okay, so first of all, let's start with the first question. So the CDC data by itself, I mean, the data delivered by CDC deserves no different model than other data, because we don't care how the data gets delivered in batches, real-time, CDC, what else, right? Near real-time and so on. So the satellite is more or less the same. The only thing we adjust for CDC data is the loading pattern, how we load the data from the CDC package into the satellite. Because think about this. CDC stands for change data capture. So it gives you a delta. It gives you only the changes, right? If there's a change on the source data set, on the source table, we capture this from the transaction log, and we only get the changes, essentially. That's the basic idea. And then we have, so there's a delta check coming from the source system somehow. And then we have a delta check for the satellite, typically, where we identify the changes on the data set and load it into the satellite. Well, the delta check in Data Vault is more efficient, actually. Think about this. When you split the data into 2 satellites, the incoming table will be split into 2 satellites, rate of change, privacy, security, whatever. The delta check in a Data Vault loading pattern for the satellite will identify changes to the target satellite. So when there's a change in one of the columns in the source, this one change doesn't affect all your target satellites. It only affects the one satellite where you capture this attribute from the source in a satellite split scenario, right? Which is common. And that's a problem, because this thing about this, so it's more efficient, yes. But how much, right? What we do is this. The problem is to identify these changes in CDC is quite complicated for the data loading pattern. So we just turn it off. I agree with you. You're saying, well, wait a minute. Now a change on one column in the source will create a delta in every satellite, even though one of the satellites has no change because the column isn't there. Yes, that's true. So be it. The thing is this. Yes, I agree with you. It's a bit inefficient, but you're not receiving full loads from the source, right? We're not copying every record, billions of rows or millions of rows every day into the target satellite. Only when there's a change in one of the columns, it will trigger a delta in all your satellites. So be it. The problem is the extra effort of implementing a delta check for the target satellite in CDC delivery is too complicated. In the end, you have a delta check already coming from the source, not as efficient, but good enough. So we just load all the records from the CDC package, into every target satellite when there's a satellite split involved. That's what it is. And you end up with some non-deltas in a satellite, which is not a problem. Yes, there is some problem with it. They will consume storage, extra rows, and you have to retrieve them somehow from storage again when you query on it. So that's a bit inefficient. There's some performance impact. On the other hand, Non-deltas are redundant data, easy to compress, which we use all the time as well. So the negative effect, yeah, there is some, but it's not that big. Okay, so that's what we do. So we just turn off the delta check for targets. When we load data from CDC, we just load it directly into all the satellites in a split scenario. So that's number one. So the model, there's no change on the model, but there's a change on how we load the satellite. What if the source table contains GDPR relevant personal data? Well, just like in any other case, you would split the split the satellite by privacy class. That's the general answer, which means that you have one satellite for the personal data attributes and one satellite for the non-personal data attributes. That's what it is. And other splits, right? Security, rate of change, I'm not sure, no. But security, business reasons, and so on. So you just separate them. What about always empty columns? Yeah, so from an auditing perspective, you have to be able to reconstruct a full delivery without losing any data and artificially generating any data. And you have to prove that these columns have been empty. So and honestly, they don't consume that much storage. Yeah, there is some storage requirement for an empty column, but honestly, I would just add them. So because then I can, yeah, it's the full proof, the full auditability from the source all the way into target, and I wouldn't query them. If you say they're always empty, which is stated here, you could argue for a satellite split, but that would only separate those empty columns from your users, so they don't see it when they use the raw data vault directly. They have to join this empty satellite, more or less. Would consume more storage. And remember, we turned off the delta check. So even if they are always empty, for every change in the source, we get a delta in every target satellite, even in the empty satellite. So be it. So yeah, I would just, I mean, if it's not a big problem, I would just add them to the standard satellite. If a majority of those attributes are empty, you could also argue we don't add them to the target, to the data model. But the argumentation is quite simple. From auditing perspective, when we go agile, we integrate more and more data over time. So there's no point in time, except in the far future, where we have all the data available, right? Because we go step by step. We add more and more source tables step by step to the data vault. So when you look at your data vault at the moment, there's some data missing. You can only audit what you absorbed, what you ingested, right? So that's what it is. And that's typically done on a entity basis. So all the entities we captured, we have. But you could also argue to having not captured all the attributes yet. Well, in the future, when they're not empty anymore, we will add them, right? That's the argument. So if that works well, talk to your auditor, then you could just remove them as well, right? I'm a fan of adding all the source entities completely to the raw data vault. I wouldn't do much analysis here. So if you don't know, let's say there's an attribute, social security number, always empty. Yes, true, always empty now, but what in the future? So you would have to analyze all these empty attributes for privacy class, security class, maybe other classes. What you could argue is, let's dump them into some other satellite because we don't analyze them and have highest security on it, so nobody can read from it until we have analyzed these attributes and then later refactored our solution and maybe had separate some other, like the social security number, separate them into a secure satellite later. So we don't give anybody access to the satellite, where we keep those unanalyzed attributes for now. That would be a solution. That's what I prefer. So I would capture them, these empty attributes. And if I don't analyze them, I add them to another satellite. I don't want to call this a junk satellite. Let's have a better name, but yeah, extra satellite or whatever. And that's why I keep them for later to be refactored. Because the refactoring is easy, and I have all the data, all the deltas, all data capture, essentially. That makes it easier for me than loading it from the data lake again. All right. How would you split this data into several satellites? Yeah, just standard pattern. So I go by not rate of change, most probably, depends a bit on the target model. Rate of change is for reducing the storage consumption. But especially if you go CDC, especially if you have these non-deltas in a satellite, you really want to turn on page compression on the target database. So you want to compress these tables. And if that's the case, the rate of change split is not that important anymore. And then, but you have to split apparently by security class, privacy class, by minimum, And then you also want to split by business cases sometimes, use cases sometimes, but security and privacy is the most important one. And for sure by source system, right? So don't mix different source systems. And I'm even a big fan of not denormalizing source tables. You could, but I'm not a fan of it. So I'm separating by source table. Each source table has its own satellite with some exceptions though, right? IoT data or multi-tenant data sometimes and so on. But yeah, so split by source system, privacy level, security classification, and maybe some business reasons. That's how you typically split these satellites. But it's a standard split. There's nothing special behind it. Yeah, it's just a loading of this CDC satellite. That's the difference. Cool. Good question. If you have a question like this, and we have a couple of questions, they pile up at the moment, which is nice. Unusual for summer, so most probably your summers are not that nice, or you have no garden apparently, but it's good. I mean, seriously, I need those questions, and because I'm here most of the Fridays. So yeah, use this form sfr.ee/dbfriday. That's where you can submit your question, upload some pictures if you want from a whiteboard, team picture. We received some Word documents already. All good. And check out, come on, move. Scalefree.to/webinars, where you find webinars on Warescape and DBT at the moment. They're once a month, but they're run by our tool experts at Scalefree, not me. And yeah, that's where you find those. And check out the Data Innovators Exchange, which is a community forum-style community where you can also ask questions if you can't wait until next Friday. That's where you get answers actually quicker, and also good answers, because they are essentially answered by the Scalefree team and Ignition Data team. That's where you find those. So yeah, check it out. It's free. Sign up and get your questions answered. All right. Thanks for joining. And I hope to see you next Friday, guys. Thank you.